Okay, we're live. No swearing. I'm saying no swearing, but you can swear as much as you want. Nobody can hear. Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at Feuerbach and Marx, and this is where it starts to get kind of exciting. I think these are two thinkers that have influenced me. Feuerbach is kind of secretly one of my favorite philosophers, at least favorite minor philosophers. Feuerbach isn't seen as like one of the canon. He's not seen as someone who like is incredible in his own right. He's important as this transitionary figure. He opens up a whole way of doing philosophy that influences Freud, it influences Marx, it influences a variety of thinkers who come after him. I'm not sure if he influenced Nietzsche or not. I've got to look into that. But you see his fingerprints everywhere, and he has some fascinating insights. I mean, Feuerbach is probably the first person in the Western tradition to really give a systematic reflection on how to understand Christianity that didn't presuppose like a supernaturalist interpretation. So Feuerbach wants to take religion seriously. He wants to understand it deeply, but he wants to give an alternative origin story. And so that's what he does in his books, The Essence of Religion and The Essence of Christianity. And we're going to reference both of those tonight. He is kind of like a gateway to the Masters of Suspicion. The Masters of Suspicion were there was a phrase that the Christian philosopher, actually Paul Ricoeur, used to describe Nietzsche, Marx, and Freud as this type of unholy trinity who came along and started to look at what was going on beneath the manifest descriptions of Christianity that you got in the church. So, for example, Freud was interested in looking at how wish fulfillment played a part in religion, that the desire to have, a loving parent who cares for you unconditionally can be seen to play out in religious form. Nietzsche explored how religion can hide a certain resentment. He explored how, if you're weak and if you don't have weapons, you can turn to ideas, and in your head you create an ideology that says you're good and your enemy is bad, and it's kind of a way of being resentful, and kind of like you get your anger because you can't express it directly, you express it indirectly. And he found in lots of religion very subtle forms of resentment, although he had a lot of time for Christ. He was a big fan of Jesus in some respects. But he was very suspicious of the religion of his day. And then Marx, of course, who saw religion as a largely positive phenomenon, but that prevented people from really making a difference and changing their lives. He saw it as kind of like this superstructure, and beneath it were human interactions, human relations, how we interact, and that's what was important. And then religion was a kind of a form of ideology that was on top of that base, and that what we had to look at was the base. That what we had to look at is resources and how resources are distributed, how human beings look out for each other, and religion kind of like was a bit of a smokescreen. But we'll look at that in a second. I'm going to touch on Marx tonight. But with Feuerbach, I want to split his work into three sections. I've lectured on Feuerbach a number of times, and I think actually this is a good way of thinking about his work. And we can put his thinking into these buckets. And the first is magic, the second is religion, and the third is theology. So he wants to kind of explore what magic, religion, and theology are, and ultimately the latter is the thing that he's most famous for, and we'll get to that. So Feuerbach in general wants to give a reason for why we are religious creatures. Why do we have this sense of believing in gods or a single god or in demons or in ghosts or anything like that. And the story he tells is one where human beings at some point in history became conscious of themselves as beings. Just like a child, like an infant, there's a point in the infant's life when they become aware of themselves as an individual. So this happened to the species that we are part of. There was a point when our ancestors became aware of themselves and could reflect on themselves in a way that they previously couldn't. And for Feuerbach, two things naturally arise from this. And the first can be called magic. Because when you become aware of yourself, you become aware of your desire for self-preservation. Now, that existed before you became aware of yourself. But when you become aware of yourself, you become aware that you want to protect yourself, that you want to protect your life. But we live in a world where there is disease and there are enemies and there are things coming in from all angles that can potentially threaten our existence. So it's very natural for us to want protection and to ultimately build armies, to build walls, to learn how to fight, to protect ourselves from enemies. But this never completely works. There's always an insecurity. There's always something coming in that threatens you. No matter how safe you are, still there's disease can kill you. Still your friends could betray you. And so for Feuerbach, it's very natural for human beings to desire and deeply desire some being or beings who would offer protection. It's kind of like if you imagine being in a desert and you have a desire for water. And so the deep desire for water ultimately gets you to see a mirage, to see water. In the same way, this deep and intense desire for self-preservation causes us to fantasize about a being who can protect us. And that's kind of magic. Magic is basically the definition of wanting to manipulate the environment around you in various ways. We see this all the time, you know, even in the most rational beings. If we're very sick, for example, and nobody can define what it is, we may tend to look for other explanations, which is very good because some of those explanations might be, you know, might lead to something. But we might start carrying around a rabbit's foot or crystals or something like that that we think might help. So we have this real desire to find something. So science is what comes out of this, the desire to manipulate our environment, to use it in order to protect us, in order to give us a better quality of life. But you know, because this is never something that can fully happen, there is this part of us, for Feuerbach, this part of us that will always fall foul of magic. And you see this actually in like athletes. You know, a lot of athletes will wear their kind of favorite kind of lucky underwear and their lucky socks or a brooch or something like that. And these people might not be superstitious in any kind of real sense, and yet they still engage in this kind of ritual. Or you may kind of not believe in kind of life after death, but you hear wind chimes outside your window on a still night and your mother's just passed away. You just get this sense that those wind chimes are your mother speaking to you. It's almost happens before you catch yourself on. And so Feuerbach says that's why there are elements of magic everywhere we find human beings. It's one of the ubiquitous things anthropologically. And he says it's obvious because of that. And secondly, Feuerbach says, and well, what about the feeling of not wanting to manipulate the world, to change it and transform it in ways that help us? What about that sense of wanting recognition, of feeling loved and embraced by some greater source? So you don't want that source to, you know, fight your battles. You're not praying to that source that your football team will win. You're not doing that kind of petitionary type of prayer. You're more like a mystic who simply uses prayer to connect yourself to this kind of overarching source. And this can be called religion. But of course, like any concrete religion has a little bit of magic in it and a little bit of this more mystical element to it. And for Feuerbach, that's also incredibly natural. We would expect to find this whether or not God existed. He says that human beings are inherently social. In order to understand myself, I need other people. From the very beginning, an infant requires mother and father or kids or other people around it, a society around it, to begin to get a sense of itself. I can understand myself as an I because there is a thou. This is why we can feel like it's hard to say when we start and the people that we care about stop. That's why if you break up with someone that you really love deeply, it can feel like a part of you has died, because in a sense, a part of you has died. Your love for them and your relationship with them helps to define who you are and your essence and your being. So Feuerbach says this is the way it is as human beings. This is how we develop, and people have come along afterwards and really kind of seen this from a very scientific perspective, that this is in fact the case. But for Feuerbach, he says the problem is people do die, people stop loving us, things happen, and we experience a destabilizing of our ego, a destabilizing of ourselves. And so again, we have a strong desire that there would be something that didn't die, that didn't stop loving us, that recognized us for who we were, and that unconditionally accepted us. This, for Feuerbach, is a completely natural thing, and you would find it anywhere that there are human beings, self-conscious beings. And again, that would seem to be the case, is where we find human beings, we find in those societies a sense of some sort of being that, in some respects, looks out for us, cares for us, wants the best for us. So that's the essence of religion for Feuerbach, those elements, kind of the magical and the mystical element. And he says you don't need a supernatural being in order to justify why those things exist. Like C.S. Lewis, who we mentioned last week, and by the way, I misquoted. There was a point where I was talking about something that John Caputo said, and I used the word C.S. Lewis. I can't remember what it was, but sorry about that. But C.S. Lewis said, the idea that someone is hungry would lead one to suspect that food exists. Whether or not you ever get to eat, the idea that there is hunger is evidence that there is such a thing as food that would fill that hunger. But Feuerbach provides an explanation that says, well, it doesn't really work like that. You have this desire for a being that wants the best for you, that wants to protect you against your enemies, that wants, the best for your community. That doesn't necessarily imply that such a being exists. Actually, there's very natural reasons why we would think like that. But then the third thing is theology, and this is where it gets really interesting. And this is where Feuerbach gets into some really interesting kind of ideas. In fact, Karl Barth loved Feuerbach and loved Feuerbach's work on this. And Karl Barth's like a conservative theologian, but he wrote the introduction to one of Feuerbach's books, one of the editions, which I couldn't find on the internet, but it's in one of my boxes of books. So if I can find it, I'll put it up on the readings for extra material because it's very good. Karl Barth felt that Feuerbach spells the end of liberal theology. What Feuerbach has to say about theology is something that actually, even the most conservative of Christians can really accept and embrace. In fact, for Karl Barth, it's easier for conservatives to like Feuerbach than it is for liberals. But yeah, so Feuerbach comes to theology. And theology for him is the reflection on God, the reflection on this religious feeling that we have. What is this God that we feel it wants to protect us? What is this God that we want to be recognized before? This God that loves us unconditionally. And Feuerbach says, well, theologians have actually understood that when we talk about the characteristics of God, we end up really talking about ourselves. That so much religious reflection looks like a reflection on the society that created that God. Just like owners kind of look a little bit like their dogs sometimes, people's gods look a lot like them. And theologians kind of figured this out pretty early on. And one of the ways that they solve this problem is through negative theology. So, theologians would say, okay, God is love, but not like we understand it. God is a father, but, that's gendered. That's connected to a history of fatherhood. It connects with, a biological function. These are nothing that relate to God. God is protected from this. This kind of relates to what we looked at last week, the death by 1,000 qualifications. The idea that theologians kept saying, okay, God's not like this, God's not like that, and they get more and more abstract in their understanding of God. And Feuerbach kind of likes this approach. He sees theology going in this direction, but he says that theologians have picked the wrong side of this. Theologians have distanced God from God's attributes that we read in the Bible. Like if you read the Bible, it's a God who is loving and just and angry and is involved in battles and all of that stuff. And for Feuerbach, that's what religion is. Religious people are interested in that. And theologians have purified God so much that they don't care about the attributes. They care about this purified abstract notion. And Feuerbach very cleverly said, that's atheism. The theologians are atheists. They're atheists in relation to these attributes. He says that's the important thing about religion. That's the bit that people are excited about. That's the bit that tells us something really important and interesting. This abstract God, that's fine for universities, but it does nothing. It's just interesting as a scholastic debate. And he says the theologians are great that they've separated these two, but they should have gone with the attributes and not gone with the abstract God. And so Feuerbach says famously, I am a friend of the theologians. I have come to show you the truth of theology. And the truth of theology is that it's anthropology. The truth of theology is that it tells us something about humanity, people. And so his thinking is this. In order to understand yourself as an individual or as a species, you need to project yourself onto something external to see it. So the first thing you have to do is get some distance from yourself. Sorry. If I want to understand myself, I need to be able to, in some senses, step back and be a bit objective and look at myself. And he says, so what happens in theology is we have this notion of God that's created because of our weakness in nature and our desire for recognition. So we have this screen, we have this idea, and then we project onto that human essence, what it is to be human. We project onto it all of the things that are actually ours. Love, justice, mercy, anger, bitterness, revenge, everything gets put onto that in a bigger kind of purified form. And this is necessary, Feuerbach says, for the development and the evolution of human species. If we want to become self-aware beings, the only way to do that is to project out our essence, who we are and what we are. But that's only the first stage. When we do that, we impoverish ourselves. We both become human, become subjects, but also we become poor because we have put our essence out there onto something fictional. So for Feuerbach, if something good happens and you say, "Oh, God is good. I just got given $100 and I needed it," Feuerbach would say, "Well, you're kind of thanking the wrong person. You should be thanking the person who gave you the $100. So you're kind of like impoverishing the situation by thanking the divine." Or, I guess if you say something terrible happened and it was because of the devil, again, he would say, "Well, that's something that's happening in the material world. And by projecting that onto some sort of external source, you're not taking responsibility for that. You're not seeing where that really comes from." So he said, God is my first thought, reason is my second thought, and humanity is my third thought. And basically what he meant is God is my first thought, in the sense of, yes, we create God because of our weakness in nature, our desire for recognition, and we project onto that God aspects of our own essence. Then he says we enter into a rational phase where we begin to look at those aspects of the divine kind of philosophically. And I guess he's thinking about Hegel here and basically the development of science and development of philosophy, the Enlightenment, what was really going on in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. This real embrace of rational reflection. And that was a point where we begin to abstract and not so much think about God in magical terms, but rather start thinking about God in rational terms. But then ultimately, the third stage is whenever we take back those elements into ourselves. We embrace those things as human, all too human, and we kind of learn to live without some sort of external presence or an external force. So that, in a nutshell, is Feuerbach. He's saying theology is anthropology. He says that it's the characteristics of God that are important, not some sort of abstract mystical thing. If that exists, fair enough. But and I say before, like the clever thing is he says, but that's kind of atheism. It's atheism because it gets you to the point where you're not making any big claims. You're not doing anything. You've just got this very abstract God who is completely unlike us, doesn't interact in the world at all. And he says, if I have to make a choice, give me the attributes. And Luther is very important in this as well. Luther does a similar move and says, forget about God and abstraction. All we can talk about is God as God is revealed in Christ. But Feuerbach's doing a kind of a version of that without kind of the supernaturalism. And he ultimately sees this as fulfilling theology. He beautifully says, at one point, he's a very good writer, he says, I want to take communion wine and make it into real wine. I want to take the wafers that we take at Eucharist and make that into real bread. And I want to turn baptismal water into real water. In other words, this is the truth of Christianity. Real food, real wine, real water. This is always what it's been about. And this projection out is just one part of that one stage in the human development. Okay, so he got critiqued by his own people for, there's about 3 reasons. A guy called Max Stirner wrote this very, very good critique that you can find online. I'll probably put it in the extra material, actually, so you just have it in the future if you ever want to read it. But Max Stirner felt that he didn't go far enough in his critique. He basically said, if I can remember correctly, you still have this ideal. You don't have this essence. God is loving and good and kind, or all of that. But you have this essence that now is human. But it's like he's saying human essence isn't unchanging, isn't eternal. It depends on all manner of things. It depends on your culture, your upbringing, your environmental conditions. So the idea that there's one unchanging essence, it just sounds too religious. He says you have to go a step further and just get rid of that whole idea. God is not like the reflection of our eternal essence. God is a reflection of our current position in society in the world, and that will change depending on the society that you're in. He also said, like, Feuerbach was more interested in the human species than the individual. So for Feuerbach, God wasn't the reflection of me as an individual. God was a reflection of what the human species as a whole could achieve. Like whenever you say God is all powerful, you can't say, well, that's human, that's my essence, I'm not all powerful. But what Feuerbach is kind of saying is actually, the human essence, human society is unlimited over a great amount of time. There's probably no real limits to what we can accomplish. There is a sense in which there is this omnipotence built into the human being. And it's funny that he says that in his day, because when we live today in a time where scientists are saying we may be hundreds of years or less away from, incredible technological advances that will bring us into what's called an age of transhumanism, where we're not even really human anymore. We're something else. So, I mean, not that is necessarily going to happen, but there are people who say that actually we're very young as a species and we've already accomplished a fair amount. I mean, what are we going to accomplish if we don't annihilate ourselves in the next 10,000 years? Maybe all the things that we said about God are things that reflect something of ourselves. But Marx, who I want to look at briefly, he loved what Feuerbach said. He felt that Feuerbach really gave a good description of why religion exists. But he also felt that Feuerbach was too essentialist in his thinking, that actually religion told us more about us in our current state rather than, I'm sorry, there's a bit of noise in the background, but us in our current state rather than what we are in our essence. So Marx kind of like really took on a lot of what Feuerbach was saying, and then in the reading that you'll be getting later in the week, gave his own reflections. And this is in the introduction to Hegel's critique of Hegel's philosophy of right. And this is where Marx famously says, religion is the opiate of the people. Now, one of the interesting things about this phrase is, he goes on to say, religion is the heart of a heartless nation, the soul of a soulless condition. He kind of has this view that somehow religion captures something of human suffering. So this isn't negative. I mean, people think that Marx had something really, really negative to say about religion, but he's actually saying that it's something quite beautiful. But ultimately, he's saying it functions as a painkiller, that we experience suffering in the world. And whenever you suffer in the world, one of the things you do, if you have a trauma in your life or something that's very, very painful, we often try and take drugs or try to cover it over in some way. And, this is a fine thing to do. We all do this. We all try to run from our suffering in some kind of way. But the problem is the solution to the problem becomes its own type of problem. If you take opiates, if you take alcohol to cover over a suffering, eventually that starts to generate its own sufferings. And it also stops you from actually making changes in your life. It stops you from doing things that would actually make your conditions better. So Marx goes on in this reading to say, religion is like the imaginary flowers on the chains of our oppression. We must get rid of the imaginary flowers, not so that we see the chains and despair, but so that we can break the chains and pick living flowers. So with this analogy, Marx is saying that religion is great at helping you deal with real difficulty and real pain. It's like Joseph Webster, who wrote the famous hymn, Sweet By and By, in 1868. Joseph Webster was famously a very depressed person, and he wrote this song because it gave him great consolation. When he was depressed, this was a song that helped him think that in the next life, things would be better. But this song became a hymn that was popular with the Salvation Army. And the Salvation Army would often sing this song to miners and workers as they were coming home from 10, 12-hour shifts, working in horrible conditions, not making any money. And they would hear the song, "In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore. In the sweet by and by, we shall meet on that beautiful shore." And actually, Joe Hill, who was this kind of revolutionary figure, he famously wrote a parody of "In the Sweet By and By" called "The Preacher and the Slave." And in this song, the famous chorus is, if I can remember it, "You will eat by and by in that glorious land above the sky. Work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die." So, which is where pie in the sky comes from. And what Joe Hill was saying was this type of religion that's captured in the song "The Sweet By and By" was a song that said to people, life is tough at the moment, really difficult, I know, but hey, it's going to be better in the next life. So it reflected real suffering. It acknowledged that there was real suffering in the world, and that's what Marx liked about it. But the other part of it was it said, nothing much you can do about it, just sing the song, get on with life. And so the song became, for Marx, a type of alcoholism, a type of drug. You would drink this song in, drink these hymns in, and they would help make you feel better. But ultimately, you still had to get up and work that terrible job in the mines with very little kind of money, and probably dying very early, all of that kind of stuff. It didn't change any of that. So Joe Hill's parody, which is kind of a Marxist parody, was saying that, in fact, because the last line is, "Workers of the world unite," and it kind of goes on. I'll put the quote on Facebook. I'll put the song on Facebook. But it ultimately says, "Don't wait around till the sweet by and by. Don't wait around for pie in the sky when you die. Unite and fight for real change in the real world." And so when Marx says, get rid of the imaginary flowers, he's saying, in an intervention, you tell someone to stop drinking, but you don't do that so that they see their oppressed life in despair. That's part of it. If someone's an alcoholic and you do an intervention, they're drinking for a reason. Maybe it's a terrible job or a terrible relationship or, a trauma from their past. There's stuff there. And if you ask them to stop drinking, the chances are you're going to confront that. But people don't do it so as to destroy their friends. You don't do an intervention because you hate the person. You do the intervention because you love them. Because you realize that the first thing they have to do is face those things, face the chains, so that they can break them and then pick living flowers. So Marx is really distinguishing between the type of hope that gets you to sit back and do nothing, and the kind of hope that demands that you act, that you put your shoulder to the wheel of history, that you do something. It's the kind of hope that you have if you want your kid to grow up to be a caring, compassionate person who has good relationships. That's a kind of hope that you don't just sit back and think, oh yeah, I hope that happens. It's a hope that demands you do something about it. It's a hope that demands you act. Or if you want your kid to go to university, that's a hope that requires that you save money, that you teach them how to read and how to think, and you read to them, all of these things. So Marx's critique here is about saying the religion that he saw predominantly in his day was a type of alcohol, a type of drug. And his reason for wanting to critique it was simply so that we could get to real change. And by the way, in the reading, not maybe in the short reading that I give you, but in the longer reading, in the extra materials, you'll see that he mentions how the critique of religion is the beginning of critique. Because what he says is this religious desire to avoid suffering and to not really fight for real change, it has secular forms as well. this is the funny thing. He says, yeah, we all know it has religious forms. That's easy, but it actually has secular forms as well. And that's why you'll hear me sometimes talk about living in LA and feeling that it's an incredibly religious place. Like there was in a story, and he said, if religion is a opiate, then the Irish are addicts. Because if you go to Ireland, there's churches in every corner. But actually today you could say then people in LA are addicts, because everywhere is trying to cover over pain by consumerism, by fame, by money, by spiritual practices, by drugs. Seems like everybody is a prophet, is a preacher of escape from your pain and your suffering. And Marx is someone who's standing against that and saying, no, we need an intervention. We need an intervention in religion and in politics. Okay, so there's my introduction to the readings that you'll be doing. We've got good questions here, so I'll just kind of go through some of them. It seems Feuerbach understands that everything is either a placebo or a nocebo. I have to confess, I don't know what a nocebo is. Can someone tell me that? I'll come back to it as soon as you tell me what you mean by that, because it sounds like an interesting comment. Zach, so Feuerbach says mystics focus on God, attributes, whereas he says attributes. Hold on. Should God here be understood as essence, or rather substance, with the attributes being the actual essence of God? So Feuerbach says mystics focus on God, without the attributes, whereas he says he wants to focus on the attributes, not God. You're using shorthand. That's confusing me, right? Should God here be understood as essence, or rather as substance, with the attributes being the actual essence of God? If I understand you correctly, Feuerbach's using the word essence to describe the attributes of humanity. So when he talks about the essence of human beings, he's talking about us as, love, care, compassion, all of these kind of, that's what he means by the word essence, yes. And so substance, would be the form, essence, the content, substance, the form. Would that be correct? And so he's saying, yes, God should be understood as the essence. That's it. Yeah. It takes me a while. I'm a bear of little brain. But yes, if you're saying that Feuerbach is going, concentrate on God as the essence, as the characteristics. That's what's important. Now, Feuerbach didn't believe in any being behind the characteristics. He believed just in the characteristics being projected onto a screen. I don't know if that helps or not. A little holdover from last week, but I'd be interested to know your thoughts about whether Christianity has contributed to anything truly unique in the world. A little holdover. I'm interested to know if your thoughts about whether Christianity has contributed anything truly unique to the world. Okay, yeah. I almost want to kind of hold off on that. I mean, because I guess the reason why I do theology or philosophy of religion and kind of, consider myself a Christian and work within that frame is because I see in Christianity some things that I think are innovations. And so, for example, when Paul says there is a community of neither Jew nor Gentile, slave nor free, male nor female, all are one in Christ Jesus. He gives this vision of a community that transcends all of our racial and sexual boundaries, that breaks them apart, that challenges them, that challenges radical inequality. Now, you could say Paul doesn't live up to that, but there is this vision in Paul, and at the time, that was incredibly unique. So there's some philosophers recently have written on that. A guy, Alain Badiou, has written a book that talks about this Paul, what he calls the Pauline universal. He's like, radical French atheist, no interest in the church, but he sees in Paul something like a very unique type of community and vision that's as important today as it was when Paul had this insight back in Rome. So there are elements like that. and that's what I try to explore in my most recent books. But they're not the usual type of things that you think about. I mean, my argument is that Christianity has this rather unique, not completely unique or anything like that, but one of the things that interests me about Christianity is in a world where certain people had access to the truth. Christianity said everyone has access. And again, that was like this radically innovative idea in a time whenever some people were in control and some people weren't. Or another one, very quickly, when you think about Jesus and Caesar, both were claimed to be sons of God. Both were claimed to be born of a virgin. And so when you read this in the context, you go, oh my goodness, Christianity is like a direct critique of Caesar. Because Caesar has armies and Jesus has none. Caesar has a palace, Jesus is born in a manger. Caesar has this political worldly control, and Jesus just has a ragbag bunch of followers. And again, that is quite an interesting innovation, that real power is in powerlessness. But I don't know, those are just some kind of thoughts. Lisa Swan, God of Feuerbach, oh, that looks quite I won't read all of that now, but other people can see it. It's a prayer by Francisco Alarcon. Am I saying that right? I'll have to have a little read of that. But I'll do another question. From Alejandro. I can't pronounce your name. Alejandro. Let's go for that. You talked about Feuerbach's position on magic, religion, and theology as feelings from the human being. Are they actually feelings or mental constructs? How would you define them? Also, you talked about the 3 stages: thought of God, thought of human, but I missed the second one. Could you please repeat? Yes. God, reason, human. So God is kind of like, pre-enlightenment, pre-reason, more superstitious kind of thinking. Reason is kind of like, what you see in the kind of post-Descartes, we're really human beings, but the growth of the scientific method, the growth of kind of philosophy as a systematic kind of reflection on reality. And then finally, humanity, because he feels that we need to get beyond that pure rationalization and learn to be sensuous. I mean, he was quite against philosophy. I don't think he taught academic philosophy at all, maybe occasionally, but he was very much into going like, we as human beings simply need to learn to live, to love one another, to be empathetic and to care, and philosophy is too abstract. But theology is feelings from the human being. Are they really feelings or mental constructs? Not 100% sure what you mean. This is the limits of typing and me reading stuff. But Feuerbach kind of wants to argue that these are, I would say that they're structures, they're psychological structures. So they result in feelings. So there's the oceanic feeling that many people get, where they feel at oneness, they feel connection with the divine. So there's those feelings. But Feuerbach wants to kind of say that there's a structure, there's a logical reason. And he wants to build a logical reason from the idea that we are self-conscious. And because we're self-conscious, we're conscious of our own needs, our own finitude. We're aware of the dangers that we face. So like a dog, for example, is unlikely to be very aware, if at all, of its own finitude, of its own kind of like instincts for self-preservation. It feels them, but to be able to reflect on them is where the real evolutionary development happens. And that means we can make tools, that means we can kind of build walls, etc. But so Feuerbach saying that it is a structure. It's not like you're not going to find it in the brain. You're not going to find the religious structure in the brain necessarily, but it's a structure of self-consciousness. It's a part of just being self-conscious, I think. Yeah. Let's see. Doesn't an approach to life that doesn't include God just lead to nihilism, an empty and meaningless chasing after the wind? Yeah, this is always a question that comes up. is ultimately, if you don't believe in an overarching meaning, then is everything, in a sense, ultimately meaningless. You look at a flower, but it passes out of existence and it will never be again. The people that we love are here for a time, but then they're gone. I want to say that I've noticed that I think this is quite more of a psychological thing, in the sense of I've met some people who feel that very deeply when they think that life does not have longevity or everlasting life and overall meaning. That psychologically provides, is painful. And for others, I know it doesn't seem to have any effect whatsoever. It doesn't lead to nihilism. I mean, where I'm from in Europe, there's belief in God is a lot less than in America. And most of my best friends, a lot of them don't even have any religious background. And it doesn't lead to that. And Freud talks about this because he found it interesting. He had a friend, and the friend was looking at a flower that was dying, and he says, this is the depressing nature of life, that everything passes. And there was something that he mourned about that. And yet Freud was he was like looking at it and going, but that's what makes it beautiful. Longevity doesn't make something meaningful any more than, temporality makes it meaningless. So yeah, I don't know if that's a philosophical question or a psychological one. But we will probably touch on that again. I mean, it's a big one. I get that sometimes. It's like, why is Marx or Feuerbach so interested in human flourishing if ultimately they believe that nothing has eternity? Although, funny thing is, Feuerbach might say that he does believe that humanity or life overcomes death. See, for Feuerbach, God is where we put our own essence. So as individuals, we die. But for Feuerbach, the human species might not die. Or even if it does, life itself continues. And so he would say something like, if you someone who's dying of terminal illness, often they take great comfort in the fact that someone else is going to continue to live after they've died. So, the mystics talk about this, that you get to a point where you don't celebrate your own single existence. You celebrate the fact that you are participating in life, a life that was there before you and life that continues on. So Feuerbach might say that he thinks that ultimately life will continue, and we are a drop in that, and that's a good thing. And Schleiermacher, the theologian, he actually, as a Christian, he said that he felt that the personal immorality, that idea, or immortality, personal immortality, was not, he felt, a very religious thing, because religious people want to lose themselves in love for God or in love for other people, to dissolve themselves into something higher and bigger. So for him, it was like, we dissolve ourselves into this. So yeah, those are just some thoughts on that question from Feuerbach's perspective. He might go, well, no, I think ultimately, whenever we say God is eternal, we're actually saying something about life itself, that life will continue on, and we'll always find a way. Many of us enjoy alcohol but are not alcoholics. Hey, I'm drinking a little gin and tonic right now, so I'm with you. Some of us do drugs but are not drug addicts. Yep, absolutely. I live in LA. Is religion necessarily an addiction, or can opiate effects serve positive purpose in our lives? Yeah, and I think Marx would totally agree with you. We all, there's a big difference between drinking and being an alcoholic. There's a big difference between watching a movie just to escape from a difficult day at work and losing yourself in kind of like fantasy life, constantly watching movies and not facing your life. And yeah, Nietzsche, when you read him, he almost seems to say, avoid all of that. He says, when you're drunk, you fall and you don't break any bones. He says, but woe to us who are made of glass. When we fall, we break. But he's like this guy, he's kind of like, he's basically straight edge. He's a straight edge before straight edge existed. He wants to look the world right in the face, no consolation. Wouldn't be much fun at a party. So yeah, no, but I think, yeah, this is, yeah, I would, like Marx and whatever, and on these thinkers, I think would very much agree with you that drinking alcohol is not at all the same as being an alcoholic. And in a sense, from a religious perspective, you can have a religion that offers a certain consolation without it stopping you from embracing kind of the difficulties and anxieties of life. For example, community. You go to a church and you have community. Community is a way of making life a little bit easier. So yeah, I'm with you. Oh, Peter, just so you know, we can't see other people's questions in the Q&A. Thank you for that. I didn't realize. Right. Well, I'll make sure I read them out before I say them. Could you build a little more on the concept of fulfillment theology? Is that the same as supersentialism? You can call me Alex. I guess that's easier. Thanks, Alex. I'm very sorry for mispronouncing your name. The concept of fulfillment theology, I guess you're talking about like prosperity gospel, the idea that what basically Marx is critiquing, the idea that religion can take away the suffering and the pain, if not in this life, in the next life. Is that the same as supersentialism? No. Supersentialism is the idea that Christianity kind of like fulfills and is kind of like supersedes Judaism. I think that's kind of what you're meaning there. Maybe there's another term for it, but theologically speaking, if you're kind of a super sensualist or super cessationist, supersentialism, actually, you know what? You might be using a different term than the one I know. I might have to look that up. Yeah, sorry. No, I thought you meant supersentialist. I can't even say the word. Super sensualist. I think that's the word, where you supersede the other religion. But I don't think you are talking about that. So sorry, Alex. But if you're talking fulfillment theology, if you're talking about prosperity gospel, that's exactly what Marx is attacking. And this is why in Atheism for Lent, we can go, yeah, like there's a great critique of that we should embrace. That any theology that says everything's going to be fine, don't worry about it. Like, you know what, you're homeless now and things are terrible, but just sit back and everything will be fine. That's not what liberation theology is about. That's not what you could say Jesus was about. But sorry for not understanding your question. I haven't read have you read Zealot by Reza Aslan? I haven't. He's an interesting guy. I've kind of listened to some of his interviews and stuff like that, but haven't read it. Okay, so I think I've kind of looked at most of the questions that you guys have. Any other questions or thoughts or comments you want to put in? I realized that I didn't answer the one about placebo or nocebo. I don't know if that was a play on words or if that's a phrase that means something. So if it is, let me know. What kind of gin are you drinking? I got asked the question. This is Nolitz. Very good gin. I'll give you gin recommendations every week. I think that would also make the thing a little bit easier. I'll do a different gin every Wednesday. Okay, so just to then do a quick overview for 5-10 minutes, and then we can kind of stop. Feuerbach is this transitional figure who opens the way up to Marx and Freud and Nietzsche. He sees three different things. There's a magical element that comes out of being human, the desire to manipulate the world, to protect yourselves, to cry out to something that will not only let your football team win, but will cure you of a disease, will help you win a battle. This is for him purely natural. And even when we get over it in our minds, we can still be enslaved to it. I see it all the time. I feel it in myself. If you feel incredibly helpless in your life, and someone comes along and offers you some sort of snake oil solution, if you're desperate enough, it is very hard not to resist it. It's very hard not to feel, oh, I should give it a try. And that's what Feuerbach means by that magical element that is part of our initial human development. Religion, which is the desire to be recognized, to be loved unconditionally by someone who will never leave us, never turn away from us, will always be there for us. So there's petitionary prayer, which is like the magic, and there is the prayer of the mystic that just says, let me be one with you, let me spend eternity with you, let us be one together. And that's kind of like the kind of mystical element, religious element. And then theology. And for Feuerbach, theology kind of separates God from God's characteristics, and that's great, but let the theologians keep with the abstract God. That's kind of atheism for him. And for him, he says, I'm the true theologian because I stick with the characteristics of God, what we read of in the biblical texts. He says all religions for him will speak of humans, what it means to be human, what our potential is, what we can be. But we have to claim that back, become fully human, and realize that what we've put on the screen called God is something of ourselves. And that we, for Feuerbach, need to learn to give ourselves over to the betterment of the human species, to life itself. That's where meaning is. That's the truth of religion, is to give yourself over to the ongoing march of life itself, and to make, and to promote that when you can. And then for Marx, he says, religion is a type of drug that helps us cope with a very painful reality. But as a drug, it also stops us from making those changes. We need to find a way to actually make real change in the world. But of course, what I hope you're hearing from this is that a lot of theologians have taken this stuff, say, you're absolutely right. And Christianity is at its best, is not about a hope that gets you to sit back, but Christianity can provide a hope that causes you to act. Now, you may not believe that, or you may believe that. I'm going to, put that out there. But liberation theology was an attempt to say, we need a Christianity that lives in the world. That's what Bonhoeffer was about as well. That's what Karl Barth was about with the confessing church in Nazi Germany. That's what Mother Teresa was about, Marguerite Porete. All of these thinkers and these activists, in a sense, take seriously the idea that a faith that just gets you to sit back and hope for the best, that allows you to get drunk on sermons and prayers and hymns, is ultimately, moving away from the true essence of the faith as you see it, practiced in religions like Judaism and Christianity. Let's see, a couple more questions have come up. I'd love to have these kinds of discussions in the local community, but haven't had any luck as of yet. Do you have any pulse on groups that form around these ideas, or any suggestions about how to find one? We talked about this last week as well, and I want to keep encouraging you who are listening to this to try to find people in your area that are interested in these questions. I do have some connections with groups around America and beyond, and if you email me directly, if I know someone, I'll connect you with them. But also, like I said last week, if you want to find people in your area, then pick a bar or a cafe or an art gallery, or if you're brave, your house. Set up a meeting and email me, and if I can, I think I'll be able to, unless I think you're a mass murderer who's actually wanting to kill people, I will put it on my social media and say, listen, in Denver, there's some people who are going to meet in this pub at this time to talk about atheism for Lent, or to talk about some issues, and I recommend you go, and I can maybe help you find those people. If you live in LA, I'm part of a community here, and you're more than welcome to come to that. Any recommendation on Feuerbach besides The Essence of Christianity and Religion, or other authors with a similar thinking? Feuerbach wrote very little, mean, there's only 3 books that I know of his: The Essence of Christianity, The Essence of Religion, and Principles Towards a Future Philosophy. He really didn't have much time for philosophy. I think near the end of his life, he got into what do you call it when you look at plants and all of that, botany. I think that was, he became more interested in the natural sciences. I think he studied astrology as well. But the truth is, like, so much of what comes after Feuerbach was influenced by him. His fingerprints are in all the thinkers that we're going to look at in the coming weeks. There's a great book by a guy called I think it's Harvey. He's one of the guys you're going to be reading this week. He wrote a book on Feuerbach. So if you want to read more on Feuerbach, it's a very good book. I actually linked to it on one of my blog posts recently. So that's a very good book. Zach, I'm just wondering, as someone working at Christian camps for the past few years, is there a good way to introduce these concepts to more conservative minds? It is hard to talk openly and intellectually about things like paratheology or even process theology. What is a good way to begin discussion with those who have probably never even considered concepts like these? Yeah, I'm fascinated by that. I'll be honest as well. I started Atheism for Lent and the Omega course and other groups in conservative settings, and they went down really well. I find that conservative Christians are often the ones who want to be most challenged. They're often the most passionate. They're the ones who want to try and change the world. God, talking to liberals is horrible sometimes. It's like you have to try to impress them all the time. Whereas if you talk to, I used to work with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, and these were young, often North American Christians who were passionate, and the only thing you needed to do was not raise the defense mechanisms. If I see you doing something not good, and I say to you, like, you say something nasty to your mum, and I say, look what you said to your mum, you're an idiot, why'd you do that? Your defense mechanisms come up and you're like, I'm not an idiot, my mum's awful, you don't know what she's like. But if I bring you out for coffee, we have a coffee, and I say, listen, you seem a bit stressed out, your defense mechanisms go down, and you're probably going to go, yeah, and I really took it out on my mum, I really feel really bad. And so a lot of this work is about how to make sure you don't hit people's defense mechanisms, and you'll know how to do that better than anyone because you know your community better. What is it that shuts people down in your community? What is it that keeps them open and interested? And so a lot of it for Atheism for Lent, which, by the way, was an idea inspired by Merrill Westphal, who is a conservative Christian philosopher. He would probably not like much of what I do. He did it. He wrote that book, and it's it's not a big selling book, but it's accepted within conservative evangelical culture because he says these people will help you be better Christians. Yeah. So there's a whole pile of things I could say, and actually, instead of taking up too much time here, what I might do is try to respond to that question in more depth for you, either on a blog post or at a future time. But I'm actually doing a 2-day course in LA about that, but I don't know if you live in LA. So, as an aside, you have resources for the Omega group. Not yet, but they're coming. If we want to let you know about, this is some more practical questions, so feel free to leave now if you want. But I'll just finish off because these practical questions I feel are really important. I'm excited about them because I would love some of you to actually run the Atheism for Lent courses next year yourself. You've done this. So I'm going to run another one. You can either join me with the new material or whatever, or you can facilitate one yourself, or you can just use this year's material and do it without me at all. I would love that. Imagine we've got like every day another 30 people sign up for this. Every day for the last week. It's crazy. You could, like, if even 1% or 2% of you set up groups, that would be incredible. But if we want to let you know about our gatherings, where should we let you know? Facebook or to an email address? Yeah, either. You can email me at peter@peterrollins.net. That's my email, but you can find it on my website. You just find an email, send it to me. That's probably the best way. But you can also message me on Facebook. Let me know. I'll see it. And, as I say, I want to bring people to you. That's what I did selfishly. I started Icon because I wanted to find the people who were interested in these conversations. And last question. Do you find a difference between American Christians and European Christians? Because I don't find these ideas fly at all with conservatives in America, at least not down in the South. Yeah. Now, there are differences between kind of Christianity as I've experienced it in Europe and in America, but, not that many. Oh, somebody's put their hand up. I've never seen that before. I don't know what that is. But there are some differences, but it's all about defense mechanisms as well. Like, I find that this stuff goes down quite well in America. I half the events I go to are kind of stereotypically conservative and half are stereotypically liberal. I get invited to very conservative schools, and sometimes I think it's because they don't know who I am. And so the more I do this and the more I've got a name, the less that happens. But I've got into some very conservative places, and these ideas often seem to go down well. But that's because I've tried to develop storytelling and humor. If you ever heard me speak, sometimes you'll know that I tell stories or tell parables, and you might think, oh, that's because he's Irish. The Irish are always telling stories and having a laugh, but not really. I had to learn that, because stories and parables and humor get around people's defenses. So maybe I'm naive, but I think these ideas can fly. But we need to learn what Kierkegaard called indirect communication, which means communication that doesn't directly hit you, but kind of gets around your defense mechanisms, like a comedian does, or like a singer-songwriter does, or like a poet does. Gets indirectly around. And that's weirdly the most direct way to get to someone is through indirect communication. I want to run a course on that, so maybe I should do that as well. Okay, guys, that's tonight. Feel free to put questions and thoughts down in the Facebook group. I think you'll enjoy the readings this week. I think they're really good, and I think actually from here on in, the readings just get kind of better and better. So enjoy them. Ask me any questions you want on the Facebook group, and hopefully you'll join me next week. See ya. And meeting for a